Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi kepada para hadirin sekalian. Khasnya kepada YB Tang yang baru saja meresmikan pembukaan Selangor International Economic Smmit. So I'm very pleased to be together with this excellent panel, very distinguished panelists, but the opening itself is giving you the perspective. Tan Sri Michael, as President and CEO, has given you some indications of why KSI and the Economic Club of Kuala Lumpur is doing this. It has been doing this for some time, giving impetus to the Selangor state government and also to the stakeholders who come in to participate in this economic summit. And of course, without saying much, Dato' Teng has charted the Selangor perspective. And I was just telling Dato' Teng just now, after he has telah meresmikan, that Selangor is poised in a sort of a heart of the whole of Malaysia, with vibrations. And while we have wilayah persekutuan just on the periphery, but we embrace the entire procedures, and therefore Selangor has got an important role. I think the statistics came out very strongly and the sort of developments that is going to take place. So the panel here this morning is going to look at from the broad talent, tech talent growth, taking trade and investment to the next level, and focus very specifically to Selangor post-pandemic economic recovery, building better for inclusive and sustainable growth. And leading this, of course, we have Mr. Sikh Shamsul Ibrahim bin Sheikh Abdul Majid. I believe the spelling is rather odd. It is Sheikh. Sheikh means a leader in Arabic. So it's not Sikh. He doesn't wear a turban. He is Senior Executive Director, Investment Policy Advocacy, Malaysian Investment Development Authority, MIDA. MIDA is in the forefront of the Malaysian economy to bringing in the attractive foreign direct investment. I think we talk greatly about it, and you will give the perspective. Then I have Firdaos Rosli, Chief Economist, Bank Islam Malaysia. We have been working together since his SIES days, and also with our economic club, looking at the roundtable and some of the things. And he writes quite extensively in the local media, particularly in the Star. And Fahmi Ngah, Director, Selangor Research Institute, very exclusive in looking at the Selangor side and how the developments are taking place and the growth models and how Selangor jives with the rest of Malaysia and how Selangor is different from the rest of Malaysia. I think different perspectives. Political differences or not, that's a different point, but economic and frontiers. And of course, finally, we have Dr. Shankaran Nambiar, Senior Research Fellow, Malaysian Institute of Economic Research, MIER, and therefore you have got a very well-versed panel. So I'll take that order as it is given. If you have slides to present, please come about. Otherwise, we will see how this progresses and we will put some very specific questions. So with that, can I ask Sheikh Shamsul Ibrahim to take the floor?
Thank you very much, Dr. Sri Kubarauta, as the moderator of this first panel session, and my fellow colleagues of other panel speakers, Dato' Teng, esteemed guests, and ladies and gentlemen. Um, I am standing in for Miss Lim Vivian. She's supposed to be here, but she couldn't make it. But this is a very interesting, panel session for today, as Selangor is contributing greatly to the nation's economy. And I believe that Selangor has put a very strong policy foundation, especially through this Rancangan Selangor Pertama. We have heard, from Datuk Teng and Datuk Sri Michael. Well, if you looked at Rancangan Selangor Pertama, I think one of the thrusts is the pengukuhan economy or strengthening of economy. I think it started from 2021 to 2025. For if you looked at the objective of the Rancangan Selangor Pertama, it is in sync or in line with our major economic and investment policies, the national investment policies, the RMK 12. So the crux of the thing is that we want to have equitable economic and distribution of wealth to the rakyat of Selangor in particular and Malaysia in general. So again, if you looked at this, Rancangan Selangor Pertama, the Trust 1, for 2021 to 2022, Selangor has fared well. Datuk Sri Tang has mentioned about the performance of investment received by Selangor State is about 60 over billion, and 2021 is 29 billion. So these 2 years, from 2021 to 2022, Selangor has received almost 90 billion worth of investment, approved investment. I think as far as KPI investment is concerned, Selangor has achieved, overachieved basically, where 25 to 35 billion KPI target of approved investment in priority sectors. And these investments are of quality, investment in nature. It has gone through stringent evaluation and deliberation at national and also state level. It will generate about, or some of them has already kickstart and already on the ground. I think when we approve this 2 years project, it will create about almost 60,000 of job opportunities. Good and high paying job, for Malaysia, for Selangor citizen. But in 2023, whether or not we can sustain this momentum, well, it is yes and no. To me, the overall economic scenario, globally, is not that great. I think many economists in the world are saying that it will be not recession, but it will be slowing down, 2.9%, if I'm not mistaken. And it will be picking up in 2024 to about 3.1%. But I think in Malaysia, our this economic growth is still about 4%, and some says 4.4 to 4.5%. Yes, because the pull factors, the pull factors that we have are still very strong. Even though the economy globally is not doing good, but for Asia, as the economic growth of the economy, the engine growth of economy, global economy, we are still seeing a lot of investors that are interested to look at the country. On the ground, we still receive a lot of delegation and investors. And from the visits by our ministers, in fact, Datuk Teng also went to Japan recently and meet with some of these potential investors. So the interests are still, very strong from these investors. Yeah. The no part is that we need to really, Selangor and other states in the country need to look at how fast that we can upgrade, the investment ecosystem and also the industry ecosystem of the country. And in this aspect, is Selangor. Yeah, good. What they call industrial parks, for example. I believe Selangor is on the way to propose some of the state-of-the-art industrial park, some of the latest, plug-and-play kind of industrial parks. These are very important because the investors are hard-pressed, for them to meet with ESG element, right? So without these good enablers, it is difficult, for them to consider Selangor and in fact Malaysia for them to invest. Yeah. The other one I think is on how fast our SMEs can embrace digital technology, yeah, Industry 4.0 and automation. If they are not at par, we have some, but we need more, yeah, of these companies that can embrace this technology, Industry 4.0 technology as well as automation, so that they can be assimilated fast, yeah, in the MNC ecosystem, yeah, supply chain ecosystems. Because when they come here, they need what they call more and more suppliers, yeah, from within this country and also the region. So if SMEs are not taking these opportunities and upgrading their capabilities, yeah, the processes, the technology, and the people, yeah, then they will be left behind. So I think this would be some of the challenges that Selangor may face, yeah, if we don't really focus on some of these aspects I mentioned earlier. So I think let me stop at there first, Datuk Sri.
Okay. Thank you, Shamsul. Can I just ask you one question from your perspective or narrative that you have mentioned? MIDA is a Malaysian Investment Development Authority, and you look at the entire 13 states or so in one basket. Is there any specific differences that you see as far as the state of Selangor is concerned, from your perspective, from the investors' perspective, whether they look at some preferences and whether the incentives are in place and so on? Very quickly.
Yeah, of course, definitely, because Selangor has been the tier 1 state in Malaysia. Selangor, Penang, and Johor, basically. These are the most industrialized states in Malaysia. So whenever investors come, obviously it depends on the nature of the projects that they want to invest in the country. I think Selangor, one of the advantages that you have is the diversified industrial base, be it manufacturing or services sectors, right? So the well-developed infrastructure is one of the key advantages also for the state of Selangor. Yeah. You have the seaports, which is top 20. I can't remember what is the ranking now. So that helps a lot, yeah, for investors. These are those enablers that they always looked at. Yeah? For Penang, for example, it is evident that their electronic industry ecosystem is very strong. So, investors are looking at this kind of sites for them to decide on their next investments. And incentives are available. Well, it's a matter of enough or not, yeah, Datuk Sri. But the government has always been, supportive of the advancement of businesses in the country. I think in 2023, a lot of focus, for incentive given for ESG based projects, renewable green projects, for example, and a lot of support given to DFIs even, the what they call bank pembangunan, and also I think MIDF and and the likes. So I think as far as incentives are concerned, well, we have quite comprehensive kind of incentives. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shamsul. We move on to Firdaos Rosli. Probably Firdaos will look at it from an overall. I think he's more macroeconomics and how it impacts on the Malaysian economic scene and the different focuses that is being given. So over to you, Firdaus. If you have slides, you can make use of them.
Yes. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all. The idea of me standing here is not to appear magnanimous, but this rostrum is blocking the view, so I have to use this. I have a couple of slides. I will take 10 minutes of your attention, which I will focus on primarily two big things. One is the global economy, where it's heading, what is happening, and secondly, I will drill down it a little bit more into Selangor, what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen, and I will draw some comparisons along the way as well. So let's start with the global economy. Now, we've heard the stories so far, and it's pretty loud and clear. Global economy is going to experience a slowdown. And it's not just because of what is happening over the couple of weeks or maybe days, but it is also because of the base effects. So if you see from the chart before you, the World Bank appears to be more bearish than others like OECD, IMF, and ADB. So the point is that the growth projection cuts were primarily because of the accelerated inflation, which is nowhere near to be abated, although it has peaked. Worsening financial conditions, we have heard about SVB and the likes, and prolonged military between Russia and Ukraine. So there is an ongoing banking crisis so far, but as far as FDIC is able to take this crisis head on, I think everything is still going to be okay for now. Global trade is healthy, but it will moderate. If you look at the chart before you, the supply chain pressure has been trending in the negative territory for the first time in many months, which is a good thing because this is primarily because of the China economic reopening. And while some may suggest that this will in turn lead to another round of global inflation, but perhaps the recessionary fears that everybody's facing right now will probably mitigate some of that along the way. Merchandise exports has gone up in the third quarter, but it will come down. The actual figure by UNTAD has not been released yet, but it is likely that it will moderate in the fourth quarter of last year. FAO's food price index, this is pretty much a good news because food price index is nowhere near what it was last year. It has actually been trending in a negative territory for about 2-3 months now. So your food stuff is actually cheaper, but price cheaper in terms of inflation, but price will continue to be elevated because of a variety of reasons, and many of which is being focused to the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. So what does it mean to Malaysia? Now, first things first, and I have to make it very, very clear here. Malaysia will experience a moderation in terms of growth, and growth will be steeper than any other ASEAN economies. We grew at 8.7% last year. Bank Islam is looking at 4.5% this year, which is in line with the official estimate. And this would mean that it will be higher than our regional peers. Looking at Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, which is about 5-6%, and it was about pretty much a similar ballpark last year as well. So it's going to be quite a steep for us. As far as real GDP growth is concerned, it has come down, and from year-to-year perspective, quarter on quarter. But if you look at the seasonally adjusted numbers, it has actually trending downwards considerably well since the first quarter of last year. So let's talk a bit about budget 2023. It's all about optimism, perhaps to fuel the self-fulfilling prophecy that everything is actually not as bad as what we think, which is, in my view, maybe it's true because one is that Malaysia is not going to experience a recession, and that is pretty much almost guaranteed. I mean, sans like swan events lah. But so far, 4.5% is still an okay kind of growth. But as far as the budget is concerned, we think that the revenue side is a bit optimistic, whereas the OPEX side is more on the pessimistic side, which means that there is a tendency for our fiscal deficit to look a little bit nicer than in most years. The government is looking at 5% budget deficit, which we think can be a bit challenging considering the current climate, but it will pretty much be seen in the coming months. Now, what does it mean for Selangor? But in my view, Selangor is the same old economy as what we have seen so far, but with a different growth path. What I mean by this is that first, we have to look at the real GDP growth of the state. It has, in terms of percentage of Selangor's share to national GDP, it has been trending upwards, which is a good thing. And it has Selangor is about a quarter of the country's GDP now. So whatever is happening in Selangor will affect the country, but it will probably be less so the other way around. I will explain a little bit more later. Look at the middle graph. The middle graph. Comparing Selangor in 2023 and way back in 2005, it has not changed much. So the services sector continues to drive the economy, followed by manufacturing as well as construction. And there is very little changes that occurs to any of these sectors over the years. Gini coefficient, the income inequality in the state, appears to be lower than the national average. This is a good sign because at the national level, it appears that the gap between the rich and the poor is pretty much higher than what is being felt in Selangor. But if I were to drill these numbers further, we can see a different perspective here, because household income in Selangor has been steadily rising again, which is a good thing, but the household income gap between Selangor and the richer state, which is Kuala Lumpur, and the second one, which is Putrajaya, has been increasing as well. Look at the top left chart of the graph in my PPT right now. You can see that while it has been trending pretty much in a similar pattern since in the 90s to the early 2000s, but it has somewhat spiked in terms of the gap between KL and Selangor in terms of household incomes since the mid-2010s. Putrajaya appears to be a little bit in a similar case as well. So if I were to put this into trajectory perspective, you can see that Selangor and KL in terms of median, mean, versus Putrajaya as well, appears to be increasing in terms of gap. So what I'm trying to say here is that while the country is growing, people are getting richer over time, but people are getting even richer in Kuala Lumpur and Putrajaya than in Selangor in terms of median and mean incomes. And with the gap getting bigger, now the question is about what about inflation? Okay, there are good news and bad news here. The good news is that the CPI, as far as Selangor is concerned, is actually, well, it's okay, but higher than the national average. So whatever that we're being felt as far as feeling the pinch kind of problem, higher borrowing costs, higher food prices, is all being felt more in Selangor rather than in other states. And this is primarily driven by two things. One is housing related, and secondly is food inflation. If you notice at the right side of the chart, in 2022, people feel that the rising prices as far as food is concerned is being felt more in Selangor rather than at the national level. What about international trade? This is also an interesting perspective because if I were to compare this with two largest states in terms of international trade, Selangor and Johor, you can see that there is a gap. The gap is growing between Selangor and Johor, and most notably after the pandemic. Both imports and exports in Johor has risen at a much higher rate than in Selangor. Total trade, for the first time in history of these two states, is higher in Johor rather than in Selangor in 2022. Trade balance has always been negative for Selangor, whereas in Johor, trade balance is positive and is going from strength to strength from a year to another. So Johor's trade balance has always been negative and increasing, unlike in Selangor. Yeah? So what about manufacturing investments? So this is another way to explain why the trade trajectory is as such. Manufacturing investments and in Johor is clearly scaling up. We are seeing that there is a spike in terms of approved investments by MIDA in the mid-2010s. And many of these investments are in fact new investments, whereas in Selangor, it's more about diversification of existing investments. So there is a difference here, and this will in turn lead to the trade dynamics in these two states. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that based on the numbers that, official numbers that I'm seeing, is that Selangor is, well, getting more prominent in the Malaysian economic sphere, but in terms of its diversification for future growth is probably it's pretty limited. With that, I end my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any of your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Firdaus. I think two aspects, as I earlier pointed out, the macro side, and then the second part, the analysis comparative to Selangor and maybe some other states. Just like to ask you this question is, to what extent the statistics that you have presented with regard to Selangor actually is impacted by the fact that Kuala Lumpur or the Wilayah Persekutuan, leave Putrajaya outside, impacts either negatively or positively in the statistics that you have put out?
I think there is certainly correlation between these two states. So as Kuala Lumpur progresses, so will Selangor. But I guess Selangor is a little bit more different, where it has its own political narratives, unlike in Kuala Lumpur, where Kuala Lumpur is a capital city. It doesn't have the kind of political dynamics as what Selangor does. So because of this, I think perhaps in my view, approvals may be a little bit different from one state to another, and this is not something that is particularly exclusive for Selangor, but perhaps if I were to expand it to other states as well, we will probably seeing the same picture as well.
Yeah, good. Now, from the macro picture, the global perspective and how it impacts the world, particularly the region and also Malaysia, it looks like we have withstood the problem, both COVID, the war. I'm not so sure this financial crisis coming to our shores or not. I hope it is just hangs on only America, the US, and Europe, it doesn't impact us very badly. We pray to God for that. Is looking at these sort of a macro factors and trends. How does that impact the actual businesses on the ground? I think Fahmi would be able to look at it, Selangor Research Institute. They'll be focusing on the Selangor side, and also I think even Shamsul brought out these SMEs, the challenges both in terms of sustainability and the other areas. Can you take on that, Fahmi?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sri, moderator, panelists, distinguished guests. I guess probably this is my opportunity to sort of push forward the Selangor voice. What I must say, I mean, those statistics, it's there, those not a problem. I think let's take that as good. What I can share with you is, I think, being in the Selangor state, opposition state for the past 3 terms, what distinguishes Selangor from the other states, I think, are 3 things. 1 is courage, 2 is confident, and then 3, resilient. I think we've been tested. We've proven that we can still grow pretty well, even during the pandemic. And I think the fact that we were opposition states for the past 3 terms would probably explain some of the figures that you saw. However, moving into the 4th term, I think it's time, and I think state has actually taken a proactive measure on what we should be doing next. Just to share with you, in the first term of administration, 2008, the first term, we were very successful in collecting unpaid revenues for the state. So reserves went up pretty well. In the second term, starting 2013, we began to practice a more prudent fiscal management, balancing operational expenditure and developmental expenditure of the state to almost balance. So it's always about 50-50 in the state. Third term, we're looking at enhancing a lot of the B40, B20 type incentives, and you saw the impact of that on the Gini coefficient, where inequality has reduced. But I think moving forward, the state needs more imagination. And what has happened is the construction of Rancangan Selangor 1 by the current administration of Yang Berhad Sri Amrin Syari, 261 initiatives. If you look at the value of the investments that are going to be poured in, plus the value that you get from jobs created. So jobs creation is about 800,000. If you look at the whole of the initiatives to 2025, you're looking at a value of 200 billion ringgit without any economic multiplier effect yet. If you put a 10x to that, I think that is a substantial number. Coming to the economy type initiatives under Rancangan Selangor 1, here you can see, I think, focus being poured into the strengths of the state. So looking at areas where we were blessed with. So 2 logistical hubs, air logistics and sea logistics. So gentleman mentioned about the Port Klang and the hub. That's the 2nd largest international seaport in ASEAN, 12th in the world. And I think recently Prime Minister mentioned potentially the build of the 3rd port in the state. So I think we're blessed. We're going to be blessed with 3 ports, 3 seaports, and then we've got airports as well, the largest in the country. I think that should be a rethink to look at putting into some focus into all this. We know that the ports, these infrastructures are well on its own. If you look at what was discussed in Davos about logistics, the future logistics talks about something called multimodal shipping. So they're talking about air to sea and sea to air in terms of logistics. I think in Selangor we stand a chance to implement that. Plus, I would say another dimensionality to that. One is to build very, very good or better supporting infrastructure. So you're looking at the roads, traffic, that sort of thing, warehouses. On the other hand as well, I think there's an opportunity for us to start introducing digitalization into these logistical industries. It is quite odd today because I think data at the ports, I think the port guys knows it well. But what is being delivered from the port to the last mile, this sits in the private sector. I think the likes of Shopee, Lazada and that sort. So I think there has to be information sharing amongst these parties facilitated by the state. And I think then you can begin to do more optimization on how you would improve these two infrastructure in the state. So I think that should be one area we can focus on. And we are focusing on that in RS1. On today's theme about tech talent, digital economy is also a big thrust in the state. Undoubtedly, today we are helping startups to grow in the state, but I think we have to also look at some focus. I think AI, that things spoke of that this morning in his speech. There'll be a university developing AI, but I think we have to look at objective implementation and application of that AI into some economic sectors in the state to really grow that sector. I think in terms of recession, there's the old adage that says that if Selangor coughs, the whole country can catch a flu. So it's very important that I think we should be looking at measures on how we mitigate that. Looking at these new sectors, one area I think which we can do better with, I don't think we have a lot of natural resources to go by, but our best natural resource are the people itself, talent. And how do we unleash that potential within the state? I think infrastructure is there, and I think pay is, and everyone's coming to Selangor because the pay potential is way higher. But within RS1, when we look at these new sectors of growth, I think these are the opportunities where talent can be built. I think really, if you look at, I think if just looking at the port and logistics alone, I get really excited because I think there's a whole lot of new industries that we can build. The maritime industry, for example, in terms of talent and human capital, but also the sort of things that Singapore were good at. Trade financing, for example, that part of it, I think it's a big industry and big play. But coupling all that against the risk that we are seeing today that's definitely coming to Selangor or Malaysia, I think climate change is very important. Any maritime base state must ensure that the maritime facilities build some resilience into it. So today, I think at the state there's been discussions about how do we input measures to measure the impact of climate change and then mitigate against that. Because by normal modeling, I think I saw a model by Nahrim about 2 years ago, when they modeled Selangor in 2050, a lot of the islands will be underwater. So I think there has to be some thinking there. How do you input maritime security from natural disasters into that planning? Of course, the security has to be thought through as well for ships as the route becomes more and more busy as the economy grows. So I think food for thought, that's what we're seeing. And I think the opportunity for the private sector is absolutely there. Please do look into that document, the economic sector, and we can talk about how do we share and divide this 200 billion worth of projects in there. I think if it's not driven by private sector, government will try and spearhead some of those. But I think it will be done in conjunction together with the private sector. I think state alone has certain limitations. If you look at the financial firepower of the state, reserves about 3 billion ringgit, and that's something like, if you compare to federal government budget 2023, that's only about 1% of federal government, not much. But I think with that little we have learned, how do we share that back with the citizens and businesses by maintaining the fiscal discipline of 50-50 split, and also spearheading in some areas, improving the safety nets for the B20 and the B40s. I think the thinking now is how do we push the M40 and the T20s further, and ensuring that the M40 does not fall into the B40 brackets by having better and more resilient social safety net type programs.
Okay, thank you, Fahmi. That's quite a mouthful. We have the presence of people from the Malaysian International Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as well as FMM, the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers. I think they are people who are well versed with the different. I think when you look at Malaysia, in terms of the tier structure, you have got the MNCs, the multinational corporations, and then the big ticket companies in Malaysia. And then you have got the SMEs. I think the challenges are in the SMEs. And of course, you have got the micro enterprises and also the warung and the stalls and these, they are part and parcel of the economy. And the government is now perplexed. I won't say they are confused, perplexed. How do we allocate the resources, the government resources, to different sectors? Because on the one hand, trade and investment is important. On the other hand, the rakyat, the well-being and the welfare of the rakyat, this is the conflict that prevails. Maybe I'll just hang on to these questions later for the panelists to come. And we will move on to Dr. Shankaran Nambiar. He is also from another think tank and research outfit, and he has been on the scene for a long time. And let's see his perspective. And then after he completes that, we will open it up for discussion from the floor and then viewpoints from you as well. Dr. Shankar?
Thank you so much, Dato Sri. I must thank KSI and Tan Sri Michael, of course, for this wonderful opportunity to be able to present some thoughts on a very, I think, pressing, important set of issues. Granted, you have what might be a slowdown this year, and perhaps the economy might not be galloping next year too. You also have geopolitical risks. But I think when you are looking at the development of a state that is as important as Selangor, you want to look at the longer term perspective. And I think that's really where the attention should be. If you looked at the FDI applications that have been coming into Malaysia, if you look at the applications for 2021 and 2022 up to the month of September, I think you have something like $500 billion worth of FDI applications. Sizable part of it is likely to be directed towards Selangor, or which could be captured by Selangor. And what are the areas in which you are likely to have these FDIs? I guess they would mostly be centered around IT related, tech related. So you would have data centers, medical devices, and investments related to the semiconductor industry. That brings us to what has to be done at Selangor. And I think it's not just Selangor, it's also what has to be done at the national level, at the level of MITI, MIDA, etc., and at the state level. I think Fahmi raised this interesting point about a different kind of government that Selangor has, which perhaps is not the same, not of the same party as at the center. But I don't think that has held Selangor too far back. Or maybe because they are not of the same party, they've perhaps tried to perform better, and I think they have been successful. I think picking on some of the points that my colleagues have mentioned earlier on, I think there are 4 sets of ways of looking at what Selangor should be doing going forward. And when I say Selangor, I also mean what MIDA should be doing. First is, I think, improving, working on talent, on skilled labor. We have to take cognizance of the fact that the new kinds of investments are going to be in digitalization. They're going to require skills in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics. And so they're going to involve the use of coding. I'm not very sure if we have enough of a supply of people in these areas, and whether they are up to scratch, up to the level that industry expects them to be. Because as I understand, you have large numbers of foreign workers in these areas. So I think there is room, there is space for our own talent to step up. And also on the topic of skilled labor, I think we need a workforce which can provide more input in areas away from assembly, packaging, etc., and more in line with design and R&D. There are reports that these areas are picking up in Penang from discussions with industry people in Penang. That seems to be the case, and presumably that is also happening in Selangor, but I suppose it has to be stepped up. And then we have the question of facilities, and that includes the kind of utilities that are available. You now have to move up the chain and provide 5G facilities, but at the same time you have to make sure that those who are on the 4G track are able to use it effectively and efficiently. And the third area that I think needs to be developed is creating the right ecosystems. Why do I talk of ecosystems? Now, for instance, I think the ecosystem for the E&E sector, but particularly the electronic sector, is so well developed in Penang, regardless of what's happening in the whole country. I think foreign investment would still very much seek Penang out. You have, they know whom they can outsource to, they know who the vendors are, they have very good support from the SMEs. So you have the whole ecosystem that MNCs are very familiar with, which would naturally attract them to Penang. And I think beyond the E&E sector, coming to Selangor, I think beyond the E&E sector, which also enjoys such an ecosystem, I think the ecosystem will have to be developed for the other new industries and the new kinds of knowledge-intensive, tech-intensive investments that are likely to come into the state. Finally, I think there has to be more awareness that is created on the direction in which trade and investment is going to go in the years to come. ESG is terribly important, and people have to come to terms that ESG is important, which means being familiar with the new auditing systems, the new accounting systems that accompany ESG, the green economy, etc. Also, something like human rights is no more a fringe matter. We've seen how inappropriate housing is termed as modern-day slavery. So companies will have to be more cautious, more in line with the needs, the demands that come from the export destinations, US, EU, etc. And all these practices, environmental as well as human rights, they will have to be standards, they will have to be in line with export destinations. I think with that, I'll stop.
All right, thank you, Dr. Shankaran. We have listened to all the four panelists, and I'm sure there are some very, what I call, expert voices down there from the comments that have been given that you would like to. I'll just hold on to some of my comments on the talent side and the education factors that you have clearly articulated. So I will give the opportunity. We have got about 15 minutes or so before we go on to the next session. So please use the microphone on the floor. Come to the floor and state your name and also which company or which sector you belong to, so that our panelists would be able to take on your question. You're also welcome to make a comment, but make that comment very brief. No need to ask questions, just make a comment very brief. Any takers? KSI will give you a small ang pao for those. All right, no questions. You start framing your questions. Let me just take on the last point Dr. Shankaran brought up. This is the talent. You will find that Selangor is also the home for a large number of universities. Many of the higher institutions of the country are in Selangor or in the Klang Valley or whatever you call it, including the Kuala Lumpur. The output, about 100,000 graduates or so every year, they come out. But the industry people would say, these graduates are not good enough for us to take, correct? FMM? Your survey will show, MICC says, I want to take people, but the qualifications that is coming out, there seems to be a disconnect between the output of the universities and also the input expected by the industries. That's a disconnect. The second one is government is pumping now. Federal government as well as state government under Dato' Teng is STEM. I think you mentioned in your speech also about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and so on. And TVET. STEM goes into the higher platform. TVET is slightly low. Not graduates, but technical competency. I think when new industries are coming, MIDA is now concerned. People are looking at what sort of a candidates do you have. Now, this seems to be a sort of a problem that is being tackled, but not good enough for immediate purposes. I want the panelists to comment on this. Any takers? Yes, please, Fahmi.
Yeah, thanks, Dato'. I wanted to say this earlier when we talk about, I think a colleague here mentioned about creating ecosystems, and I think that should be the trend of us being in government. It's that whole ecosystem. So not just focusing on education for education's sake, and if they're not good enough in getting a degree, you give them TVET. But I think what's required here is a whole chain. So when we talk about aerospace, for example, or even ports, there has to be like a main demand driver for talent, these key industries. So the port guys must say, I want, data analysts for port services and no longer forklift truck drivers. Aerospace must also think of design engineers and not just technicians. And I think that's the key. We are in the state is exploring that together with GE. So looking, even when we are selecting, if you want to build talent which parts of the aeroplane should be focused first, because we definitely can't build aeroplanes in the fullest yet. And I think there's a move now that we want to look at the critical components. So things like engines, aero engines, and looking at technicians to service that, looking at primary structures, avionics, for example. I mean, these are higher level propositions of TVETs that you can tweak and work on. So I think that that's one part, that recognizing talent is there, but I think that whole ecosystem has to be strengthened so that you funnel the right people, and then there's a final big industry at the end that would require it. So I think there are things like that we've already started in the state, I think under the Things leadership. We ought to grow that further. I mean, if logistics is going to be a key play, if you look into RS1, there's logistics, there's also agriculture. So you're looking at modern agriculture, where engineers are now moving into agriculture, doing smart agriculture, IoT-based, technology-based, doing optimization of conditions for higher yield in a lab rather than doing on the ground. So I think there are things like this which are exciting, that we've started. So I think that's where we are, which I can share with the audience.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think Fahmi has touched on some very interesting points here. For instance, modernization of agriculture. Agriculture has been neglected for a long time. Now we've seen that there's this problem with food security, which means you need to re-emphasize agriculture, but this time in a different way. And you'll have to probably use 5G, you'll have to use drone technology, etc., which might make it, which I think will make it more interesting for the new graduates who have looked at agriculture with SCON. They might be more attracted to the agriculture sector. Also, I think you need talent which can start functioning quickly and move out of the kind of very academic setting that they might have come out from. So you might have graduates who have done a degree in mathematics, in physics, whatever subject, maybe even geography, and they're not able to get a job. There should be centers that can train them very quickly over 6 months, reskill them so that they can get into Java or SQL or whatever in a way that makes them industry ready. And I think there is this problem that employers have. They find that you have graduates and they can't do this, they can't do that, they can't write a memo, etc., etc. I think drill them over a 6-month period, and they come up to the levels that are required. And this is, this is not a new suggestion. Companies have done that. They have retrained people. Infosys used to do that in a very big way. They're not bothered what your background is. You go through the system for 6 months and you either you shape up and you're able to serve industry, or you're dumped. And I think we have to look at more aggressive ways of doing things like this, which will also help us handle the problem of graduate unemployment.
Okay, Shamsul, yeah.
Just a quick one, Sri. When it comes to talent development, first of all, I think in MIDA, Dr. Shankaran mentioned about, MIDA needs to do, more on this, right? We have in MIDA talent management division. So what we do is that when we receive this investment interest, we work with the company because they will, tell us their requirements for talent and so on, right? So we know the demand of the companies, what they want, what specific skills that they want, engineers, technicians, and whatnot. So what we do is that we connect them to the supply side, which are university, technical colleges, and so on. But this is like case-to-case basis where, we can't help everybody, right? So we have a limited kind of facilitation that way. I think the more sustainable way of trying to reduce the mismatch of talents, or actually, for those companies to reskill and upskill their workers. For example, through this digitalization, IR 4.0, we have this intervention fund called, I think the amount is not that big, it's about 500,000 ringgit, for them to, improve their processes, technology, and so on and so forth. So we can see some of the benefits, real benefits. We've been to Johor recently. We've visited 3 companies and so on. So production in one of the company double up, from to 200% kind of thing. So it improve efficiency, improve skills and productivity. So, but depending on government grants is not again a sustainable way of doing things. So the companies have to spend, a lot more in what they call elevating the skills of their own talent. And for universities, to work very closely with industries. I think some of you all on the floor now are actually industries that are, doing trainings for companies and so on. So it's not, I believe it's a concept of whole nation approach, for us to work together, to close the gaps and to work together to, reduce the gaps of mismatch between industry and talents. Thank you.
Yeah, Firdaus?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sri. I have a few things to add. I have a slightly different take. Number one, I think that there is a tendency for all of us to look at the labor market from the supply side, because many of us are parents, so we want better education, better job prospects, blah, blah, blah. So it makes sense. But the reality is that it makes no sense for us to improve the supply side if there's no demand for it. Like I said in my presentation earlier, our or at least in the case of Selangor, the economic diversification has been pretty much stagnant or static over the decades, which means that the demand for higher talented workers and IR4 related and all that is actually lesser than what we anticipate. That's one. Secondly is that in the event that we need to scale up, so which industries will start first? Well, how much incentives should the government give in order to get more demand for talented workers in our economy? Second, that's second. Third is that in the event that, okay, the government said we're going to give a lot of incentives, so wages have to go up, and that is the scenario. But the thing is that wage growth actually gives a lot, determines the type of education system that we have. It's not, and not the other way around. And the one that we have been focusing the other way around, and that has led to talents fleeing the country. We've heard about how doctors are not intending to come back. Many of our engineers are in the Middle East because that part of the world is any better. I mean, the grass is always greener at outside the country. But the thing is, there is not enough or inadequate supply of many of these jobs in Malaysia. So I think the focus should be both, rather supply and demand, and not just to concentrate on the fact that we need more talented workers and all that, because that would probably bleed more talents rather than we retain them in the future.
Thank you, Rosli. Firdaus. I think we have had a fair comments from the panelists. I'm not going to give them the 25 seconds or 30 seconds final wrap up. It doesn't make any real contribution. I still would welcome one question. Do I have a lady there? Okay. All right, well done. Can you come forward?
Assalamualaikum and good morning. My name is Nikki Kamal. I'm actually working in the third sector, an NGO, in Yayasan Sejahtera for poverty alleviation. So as part of our sustainable way of moving forward, we envision to grow our beneficiaries further through social enterprises because we trained the B40s to actually become independent and have their own business through entrepreneurship. So however, since 2018, the format changed. Magic no longer does or supports social enterprise creation. It is now parked under Ministry of Cooperative and SMEs. Even then, application to establish SIES, there are no clear path and the applications mostly are being rejected. So may I know if Selangor even have any intention to actually take this matter further or accelerate SIES for the growth, SIES growth in Selangor? Thank you.
Okay, I think the panelists will not be the experts to answer this. As Tan Sri Michael mentioned at his opening, at the end of this summit, we will compile the sort of recommendations that has come about, people-oriented, industry-oriented, economy-oriented, and then we will take it up. Yes, I agree with you. The issue on the micro enterprises and young entrepreneurs, do they get the support system? And then they talk about the ecosystem. The ecosystem is there, but not in the way the users want it. It is in the way the policymakers want it. And from my Malaysian Institute of Management perspective, when we did 2006, something about this, and then we found that there are 70 agencies, almost 70 agencies involved in entrepreneurship. That's a lot of agencies, but the output is not commensurate with the 70 agencies. I think this is the weaknesses. We have similar weaknesses. Now, just coming back to the concluding part of this recovery phase of Selangor, and building a better and inclusive and sustainable state. I think Tan Sri Michael did mention about the leadership in Selangor state government. He talked about the Selangor state government. 2008 was mentioned from the time there is a changeover. There is a continuity and a new election is coming up. So everybody is also excited. Leadership is an important. Leadership at the higher level and leadership at the very focused area like YB Dato Teng and so on the industrial sector, hands-on, and then listening to the vibrations from the industries and ready to act on those vibrations before it becomes an earthquake. So with that, let me say once again, thank you very much for your participation, panel members. Firdaos, Shamsul, and Fahmi, and Dr. Shankaran. There's been an enjoyable morning and a good start. And over to you, Zaim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sri Muhammad Ibarota and the panel. Let's give them a round of applause. Yay.